Welcome back, builders. We've got some bike updates and new parts to cover in today's video, so sit back and enjoy the ride. Timestamps in the description in case you're here for a specific reason, but here's a quick rundown of what we got. WheelKid has made an update to his Gemini wheel set to improve reliability. The electric start bullet train build gets a number of improvements for comfort and practicality. Among those updates, we were able to easily install a USB charge port. Totally unexpected, proving that the hobby is certainly not dead, BikeBerry coming out of left field with an updated two-stroke design, which, if it runs as good as it looks, should be pretty impressive. I make an attempt to improve my least favorite build, the Screaming Demon, before giving up on that frame completely. I inadvertently discovered a tiny 4K camera with really good image quality that comes in under $100 and might be beneficial to other riders who want to record their adventures. And finally, the main focus of today's video is the tire tube rim and wheel set from BikeBerry, any good if you're on a budget. Let's find out. My long-term review of the Gemini wheel set is still ongoing, but recently I had some issues with the rear wheel bearings wearing out prematurely. To the best of my knowledge, this issue was caused because the axle spacer between the two bearings was made out of aluminum, a rather soft metal that over time would compress and no longer support the bearing races. Thankfully, this appears to only be an issue on his earlier models, as his current models now include high-carbon steel spacers to eliminate this issue. I do realize that a few of my fellow builders with the older Gemini wheel sets might need the updated spacer. In the past, I've been able to contact WheelKid, the designer and manufacturer of this wheel set, via Facebook Messenger. However, that can be pretty hit and miss depending on how busy he is, because I assume he's a one-man operation who spends most of his time in the shop. So Will, if you're listening, I'd like to see some contact information on your website for people to contact you directly, or more reliably. It might be there, I just couldn't find it. A recent poll on my community page showed that most voters wanted to see the BT version 2 first. I do apologize, this video was going to be my first impressions in testing that motor, but due to some real-world issues, I wasn't able to get it installed on a bike just yet. However, that kind of works out because BikeBerry also recently released a chopper frame designed to carry a two-stroke. It already has the offset motor mounts for chain alignment to get around the fat rear wheel, and up until now I never really had a good answer for anyone asking questions about chopper builds, so this looks like it might be a good match. So I'll be ordering their chopper this week and putting the BT version 2 on that bike. In our small gas bike hobby, we deal with a lot of limitations, and one of those is even if you're willing to pay a premium so you can get a better quality product and less headaches, there just aren't many options. Bicycle Engines recently did try some innovations with their Phantom 85. I believe the motor now is good, but their first few iterations of it were pretty bad. But they tried, so I give them credit for that. Innovation is not something you see very much of in this hobby. Beyond that, most other innovations are just left up to the hobbyists themselves. Small man operations like Smolik Performance, DLH, and Gemini Wheels. For example, Gemini, he realized that wheels, particularly the rear wheel, is one of the biggest pain in the ass parts of a motorized bike that you have to deal with, so he set out to deal with that on his own and is doing a really good job. So this begs the question, why aren't these retailers offering more products dedicated to gas bikes, which are capable of withstanding the abuse that this hobby entails? Although most of us probably already know the answer to why we won't see much, if any, innovation in the hobby, and that comes down to it's a small hobby, not a lot of demand, and the state of the world right now doesn't exactly shine brightly on two-stroke motors, but maybe they are. BikeBerry just released a new frame, a new motor, and they supplied us with a wheel set. The wheel set I'm skeptical on, we'll be testing in this video. Now, the motor offers a lot of benefits, things that we've asked for quite some time, and the chopper build we'll be testing in a future video might also do the same thing. Being a bit late to the party when it comes to checking out the BT version 2, this is probably not going to give you much information you haven't already examined yourself, but a few things I've noticed on the motor. Most notable to me is better cooling. It has a larger head with more fins, and the cylinder fins themselves are larger. This was one area on the Phantom 85 which was comically overlooked, was the lack of cooling. So passively cooled motors will certainly do better with more fins. Whether or not it's going to matter to you, I don't know, but this will tell me that I can do longer cruises without worrying about the motor overheating. They've also decided to go with a thick iron sleeve, and this is something I'm very curious to see whether or not will be an issue. Now, on Minarelli cylinders designed for forced air cooling, I've had issues with soft seizures. The aluminum piston on the cast iron overheats quite quickly and has a long warm-up cycle before you can really pull them without issues. I've also experimented with drop-in iron sleeve cylinders, which have been pretty hit and miss. Some of them never gave me an issue, and others gouged the cylinder, which I could only assume was from just poor quality control. Something that shows me some thought has gone into this iron sleeve design is that the inside diameter at the top of the sleeve is smaller than the inside diameter at the bottom. I'm sure there's more reasons to why they're designed like this, but what I've noticed in the past is that iron sleeve cylinders generally tend to be the same diameter from top to bottom, allowing the piston to kind of just slap around in there during all parts of the stroke. For some of you who simply never realized this before, the piston is not a perfect cylinder. It is actually smaller at the top than it is at the bottom, and this iron sleeve seems to match that. Like most other aspects of this motor, whether or not that'll make a difference is yet to be seen. Moving on to our standard phase of let's pull random things out of the motor, I'd have to wonder what was going through the head of the assembly line associate when he boxed this up. Yeah, that's probably fine. Quite honestly, I've grown so numb to quality control on two-stroke motors that had this shown up in perfect condition, I would have been suspicious. An unexpected but pleasant surprise was to find that the iron sleeve is ribbed between the mating surface of the cylinder and the sleeve itself. This should prevent it from rotating, but more importantly from dropping down into the bottom end. Personally, I'm a bit impartial when it comes to reed valves on motorized bikes. On one side, I like the simplicity of a piston port intake. On the other side, I like the efficiency that the reed valves give. Performance-wise, I've noted they never seem to do much, if anything at all, unless you do some advanced port work to the intake side. On the BT version 2, it's pretty clear that this was designed around the reed, at least when it comes to the top end, being recessed into the cylinder itself to help with clearance on builds that are tight. And assuming that the port map of the cylinder itself is designed for the reed as well, I look forward to seeing how many miles per gallon we can get out of this motor. The larger bore diameter of 49.8 millimeters, assuming this has a 40 millimeter stroke, should give us just a hair under 78 cc's. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the proprietary exhaust port on their BT motors, mostly leaning towards the positive side, but some notable negatives. The smaller but much more vocal minority of builders in the hobby will complain about the proprietary design making it more difficult to install an aftermarket exhaust system, and justifiably so, that is true. The much larger but quieter majority of builders in the hobby will find it beneficial because it makes installing this on any bike easier, simply because if it touches the frame, you can just move it and tighten it down. You don't have to take it off the motor, heat it up with a torch, and bend it out of the way. Something BikeBerry could offer, but probably won't, and I would love to be wrong about this, is a simple adapter which could go into this proprietary port and allow builders to install an aftermarket exhaust system, like an MZ65, or the knockoff clones you have on your website, which some of them are okay, most of them are not. We're going to touch on that later. Okay, actually we're going to touch on this right now because this has been bothering me for a long time, and I know I'm not the only one who thinks this. At the moment, BikeBerry, in my opinion, has an opportunity to completely turn around their image in the hobby, which has pretty much been a meme since day one. Now, let me explain. 90% of the products on BikeBerry that say performance are snake oil. They know it, I know it, most of you know it. The boost bottles. Get rid of the boost bottles. 90% of your exhaust systems, get rid of them. The deluxe pipe, that's okay, that gives some top-end performance in my testing, but like the banana pipes, they're just for noise. That's all they're for. The banana pipe with a silencer on it, that doesn't make any sense at all. You know, a lot of the products you sell don't do anything. They're just new builder bait, and that is giving you a bad image. I get it, I'm just some guy on the internet with an opinion, we've all got them, and mine's probably not any better than anyone else's. But here's the thing, in this hobby, there's a lot of downtime, and during downtime people like to talk about stuff, and usually what gets talked about a lot is poor experiences, and you can kind of see what I'm getting at. I am not blind to where BikeBerry has gotten things right. Their F-Zero frame, I've had a really enjoyable experience with that. Not out of the box, but after a few upgrades, yes. Their electric start BT motor so far has been really fun and not given me many issues. On the flip side, their friction drive kit was a complete disaster. They managed to carry a handful of parts which have come in incredibly handy. One you'll see later in the video, probably the best inner tube set I have ever seen. And Bikeberry has been my go-to place when it comes to getting very specific jets for the NT carburetors. They have everything you could need from the lowest possible jet to the highest for that carburetor, and I found it could be tricky to reliably get a hold of these on other websites. Even if it means just selling out the stock and not purchasing it again and having a limited selection of good products, which people know they can go to you to get, is better than selling a blanket amount of junk that gives you a bad reputation. That's just my 2 cents. I hope it means something. Let's move on. So the Screaming Demon from BicycleEngines.com, as most of you know, has not impressed me since I've owned it. 2 of my biggest issues are 1, the magnesium wheels, which I just don't feel safe on, and will be replacing today. And the second being that this is a full aluminum frame, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. The F-Zero, the Zeta Dawn, those are all aluminum as well, but they're built so much better than this. This aluminum frame has the tube diameters of a steel frame. Now, if you know something about bikes, you probably realize that aluminum frames tend to have thicker tubes. They use more metal. And this is because steel is quite a bit stronger than aluminum and doesn't require as much metal. However, they've modeled this after a steel frame and made it out of aluminum. Aside from the safety concerns that brings to me, it also means that it is so ridiculously flexible. This thing has more wiggle than a wet piece of spaghetti. Off camera, the biggest issue I've had with this build is just keeping the chain on the sprocket. On smooth roads, which I don't have very many of, it runs fine and doesn't give me very many issues, but as soon as I get onto rough pavement or gravel roads, the chain just pops off non-stop. I've done my best to get perfect chain alignment. I've tried different sprockets with the bevel in, the bevel out. I've even tried the arc chain tensioner, which is what the best chain tensioner you can get, and the chain will not stay on this bike. And the only thing I can think of is just how much flex it has once I start getting onto rough roads. So I'm retiring the Screaming Demon, and if you want my blunt, honest opinion about this frame, avoid it. Either stick with a Walmart frame, which in my opinion is far better than this, or get the beefier gas bike frames like the F-Zero or the Zeta Dawn. CDH makes a couple. I think they make both of these styles of frames, and if you're not sure which one you're looking at, just get the one with thicker tubes because it has more metal. Alright, onto the wheel set from Bikeberry. Full disclaimer, they sent me these wheels, tires, and tubes to review. Considering past experiences with Bikeberry have been hot and cold, I do respect their bravery, but I'm going to try and be unbiased. I basically have one good scenario as to why you'd consider these wheels, as opposed to anything else. And that's if your stock wheels took a dump and you need new ones. Not necessarily if you need an upgrade. There are a few things about these wheel sets which are relatively better than something like you'd get on a Huffy Cranbrook. Not by much, but a little bit. And then there's an area where it's not so great. You get 12-gauge spokes, and in my entire experience in the hobby, that's always been adequate. I've never had a bike with 12-gauge spokes that's actually even broken a spoke, so that's good. I think that's probably the minimum of what you want, but it's not disappointing whatsoever. They claim them to be double-walled rims. I could be wrong about this, but I think these are semi-double-walled rims, if that's a thing. So they fold over and come down towards the inner portion of the rim, but they're not completely double-walled like you might get on higher-end rims. That being said, this fold-over should give them more rigidity and better structural integrity. And in that aspect, that would actually make them an upgrade over something like a Huffy Cranbrook. And I'm using that as an example is because I'm very familiar with those rims, and I know a lot of builders choose that bike as their first build. So as far as the rims go, these are a technical upgrade compared to what you have stock on a beach cruiser. One aspect of choosing new wheels which really stumps new builders is just making sure they get the right size. If you have a single speed or a coaster brake, you'll be fine with this set. The freewheel version should allow you to use it on generic mountain bike style frames as well, but you'll likely have to replace the stock axle with a longer axle. You could reuse your old one if it's not bent all to hell, or you could just purchase a new one. But pretty much these are going to fit most, if not all, 26-inch frames. You'll also be covered as far as whatever brake setup you have, because both the front and rear, depending on which option you choose, accept disc brakes, or rim brakes. There's enough meat on these rims to allow you to use rim brakes, so if that's what you have, you'll be good. For the rear wheel, if you're replacing it on something like a beach cruiser with a coaster brake, you can just ditch the coaster brake and use rim brakes, and then it doesn't matter which one you choose. But if you're only going to use a coaster brake, then you need to choose that option. But you need to be aware of something. The coaster brake arm on this set is really thin, and I would not trust it for more than 10 miles an hour. If you slam on your brakes, this coaster brake arm is just going to strip out, and bad things are going to happen. So I would avoid getting the coaster brake version, and I would just add rim brakes to the bike if you don't want to deal with disc. Out of the box was better than I expected, though. Both wheels were relatively true, the front being spot on and the back needing just a little bit of adjustment to help prevent the tire from tapping into the chain, but not much. And on both the front and back, the bearings were not over-tightened, which is something very common when you just randomly get a set of rims. I did replace the grease they came with. I didn't have any issues with them, and they had plenty of grease, but I really like the Lucas Red and Tacky. A warning to new builders, this is very important. Coaster brake rear wheels are a pain in the ass. If you are installing a new one or replacing an old one, you need to make sure the wheel bearings are properly adjusted after installing the sprocket and putting the coaster brake arm back on. I have a video linked in the description showing you how to quickly and easily do this, and sometimes it takes more than once. After you ride the bike, you might need to readjust it, but make sure you watch that video. Otherwise, you're probably going to over-tighten your rear wheel bearings, not realize it, and grind them to death. You might also under-tighten them, and then the wheel will be really loose, and that's a lot more obvious. But you need to deal with this, otherwise you're going to fry your wheel hub and then cry about it to BikeBerry, and it's not their fault. There's nothing they can do about that. Honestly, I estimate that at least half of the bad reputations these companies get is because we're dealing with parts that weren't meant to do what we're doing, and they just have to deal with that. Capping these wheels are the Duroflame treaded tires. I don't have a lot to say about these. I didn't know they were coming, so I didn't do a lot of research. Thank you, BikeBerry, though it made my job easier. I didn't have to go out and buy a new set and put them on here. Okay, so looks-wise, they're cool. I mean, they got flame treads. They leave a flame tread in the dust, dirt. So, yeah, that's neat. But performance-wise and build quality, the tread is a bit thicker than what comes on most of the tires you find at Walmart. And more importantly, the sidewalls are thicker, and that's what I like to see, because a lot of builds have a little bit of chain rub, and there's just nothing you can do to eliminate it completely because it bounces around. And you got more meat on these to work with, so any set of tires that has a thicker sidewall is probably always going to get a bonus in my book, even if it doesn't have the best tread. Now, a bit of a different story when it comes to the inner tubes they sent me with these tires, as I certainly have something to say about these. Now, I don't think they come with the tires. I think they're sold separately on their website, listed as their heavy-duty inner tubes. They should put the Duro name on their thumbnail for those tubes just to make sure we're getting the same ones, because if they are, these are my go-to inner tubes from now on. These are ridiculously thick. You could probably run these without a tire. They're thicker than the 60% Goodyear tubes that my Walmart used to carry, for some stupid reason, decided to take off the shelf, so that was a sad day. But these are going to be my go-to inner tubes from now on. BikeBerry, this is another good example of something you should definitely focus on. These are clearly optimized for motorized bikes. They're super thick. B-roll footage for this video is me exclusively using this wheel set on my crappy terrain, so I'll come back with my final thoughts at the end of the video. Since most of the testing for these wheels is on the Bullet Train electric start build, we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about that bike and give some updates. So we installed new handlebars to give it a more relaxed ride. I went from a 36 to a 40-tooth sprocket. 36 was a bit too low for this motor with the centrifugal clutch. It just couldn't really do much if there was a slight hill at a standstill. The 40-tooth was suggested to me by other builders who ride in similar situations, not a lot of hills, and thank you guys, this feels spot on. Cruising speed is perfect and just enough torque to deal with the slight hills I have around here, but if you're using a similar motor and you have any hills, the stock 44-tooth or bigger is probably going to be what you want. Centrifugal clutches on these small motors just don't handle hills very well. And onto the USB charge port. This is really simple. I'll leave a link in the description, of course. I basically just picked this up off Amazon, bolted it to the side of the electronics box, drilled a small hole for the wires to pass through, and then tied it into the ignition switch so that the USB ports are active when the bike is in the run position, but they are deactive when I turn it off. And this is important. You don't wire it straight to the battery because then it'll just drain your battery slowly. And make sure you wire it to the ignition switch. The BT Electric Start actually has a dedicated wire in the electronics box for a headlamp, and that gives 12 volts or whatever the battery voltage is. So I just tied it into that because it's already hooked up to the ignition switch. It really was just that simple. Mounted to the side of the box, I got 2 USB ports. I can charge my phone, headlight, tail light, and a drone, which we're going to see here in a moment when we talk about the 4K camera. It's only, sadly, a 1 amp charger. And I think it's 1 amp on each port, so you could get 2 amps total, but don't quote me on that. I'm probably going to do some more digging to see if I can find another flush mount option with a higher amp readout, because I would like to charge things faster, but still, I'm happy with what this does. Anyways, I felt like charging my phone or a headlamp wouldn't be adequate to convey my excitement about this on a gas bike build, even as trivial as it is, so I decided to use this little tiny drone I got and charge its batteries, which actually works out just fine. The slow charge means I gotta ride for quite some time, but it's worth it because you find a nice spot to fly. I've been out of the drone loop for quite some time, but thanks to the FAA coming with some harsh regulations on drone pilots, it's made the technology get smaller and arguably better. This tiny little drone that comes in under 250 grams, all up weight, can carry this tiny little 4K camera. This is called the Runcam Thumb Pro. It's the version 2, and that's important because it's just better. Now, this is $100 on Amazon, but you can find it about $90 from Get FPV, link in the description. And this is the best sub $100 camera I've ever seen. It's 104 degrees. I know I probably made that clip a bit longer than I should have. I've just really wanted to show off that footage because I've been impressed on what's going on in the FPV community while I've been away focused on bikes. The improvements they've made have been pretty extraordinary. Where it's true, I do look for any excuse to squeeze in some beautiful footage. This actually has a purpose. I didn't think of this at first until I watched the end result, but this camera is so tiny and relatively cheap with such good quality. Guys on a budget who want to record their rides but they don't want it to look like garbage, this might be an option. There's a few catches, but none of them are insurmountable. So number one, it's not waterproof, so be aware of that. And number two, it doesn't have a battery built in because it's designed to be as light as possible to fit on tiny drones. So the drone powers it via 5 volts. However, you can power it from the USB port. So if you have a battery bank, not only would this allow you to run a cable and mount it anywhere, but a battery bank could probably power this thing for a day. This last one is a bit of a catch and benefit for bike riders, and it might seem intimidating at first, but I promise it's not. One of the main reasons budget action cameras look so terrible is they have poor image stabilization. This camera actually has no image stabilization, but it has a gyro. It records all the vibrations while the footage is rolling. And you plug the footage into a free program called GyroFlow, and it uses the gyro data along with optical image stabilization to give you the smoothest possible footage, and it does this pretty much automatically. You just drag your footage into GyroFlow and you're done. And it uses the data to do magic stuff. And it's simple, drag and drop, click, you're done, but it also has advanced features, so as you learn more about it, you can really tweak the settings to get damn near perfect footage. So those two things combined just make this awesome. Alright, so to summarize our thoughts from today, really looking forward to trying the BT version 2 on the chopper build. Really hope it performs as it looks. As for my 1 week first impression of the heavy duty wheel set from Bikeberry, I would call these a solid replacement if you need new wheels, but I wouldn't call them much of an upgrade. There are a few little things about them that are better than a stock beach cruiser wheel set, but not enough to justify getting these if your current set is running fine. Chances are, if you're looking into a wheel set like this, is because the rear wheel on your current build just got nuked by many of the ways that can happen, and you just need something that's solid and gonna work. And for $60 on the rear wheel, I can't complain. The coaster brake arm could definitely use an upgrade, but you really shouldn't be using that as your main brake anyways. Other than that, I have no issues with the quality, and it seems fine. So I hope you guys got some useful information out of today's video, or at the very least, were mildly entertained. And until next time, ride safe.